Welcome back to the Entrepreneur Mindset Podcast. For the past few weeks, we have been talking about course creation. We've talked about ideas to get you started. We've talked about the mindset for making progress. We've talked about creating engagement. And we've talked about building your audience. We've talked about other things interspersed in there, but I think those are the key things we've talked about so far. And one of the questions that I get asked most often is, when does the real work begin? These decisions, these concepts are nice, but what about my actual course? So if you've ever uttered those words, or you've been wondering when we were going to start talking about your actual course, today is the day. We are going to talk about some instructional design principles that are often overlooked in most course creation courses. Say that 10 times fast. Course creation courses. There simply isn't enough time to talk about all of the tech, the marketing, the messaging, the evergreening, the scaling concepts, in addition to actual instructional design. So if you're taking or have taken a course on how to create courses, you might notice that these things were missing. There just isn't enough time. The good news is that you'll know to include these things in your own course, and you will stand out from the crowd. You will become the go-to resource for your content. All too often, course creation becomes about deciding what tidbits of information to share. Don't get me wrong, it's incredibly important. If you don't have good content to share, then your course will ultimately flop, right? However, if all you have are some great bullet points and no real process to sharing the information that is rooted in the principles of human learning, then your students are not going to get the results that you want for them, what they've paid for. So instructional design is the concept that really digs into how do we present information in a way that is conducive to human learning. And it picked up in popularity in the late 90s, early 2000s, but it's been around forever. Think about oral traditions passed down from generation to generation. Those stories, traditions, rituals, they were communicated verbally, in pictures, through dance, and other ways. And they were repeated early and often in life. You were given the chance to share that information, practice it. And so the key objective being that these oral traditions were not lost. They were, in fact, passed to new generations. That is instructional design at its finest. So I tell you, it's been around forever. It really has. Some of this we do innately, and some of it, as things have gotten more complicated, we've kind of gone, what do I do now? Quality information needs to be geared toward the people who need it. It needs to be presented in a way that they can remember and understand, and they have opportunities to practice what they've learned and get feedback. So why, I already alluded to this, but why the big burst of importance and attention for instructional design in the last 20, 30 years? Honestly, I really do think it's because we started to see this introduction of online learning, and 20 to 30 years kind of coincides with when it was just beginning. It was really in its infancy. I've been teaching online for over 15 years now. And so there just wasn't a whole lot known. There were a lot of limitations with online learning. And so people started to get really creative and think about, well, how do I make sure that people who aren't sitting in a college classroom, in a classroom inside an organization, how are they still going to get all of this information? Suddenly, it wasn't enough for a teacher or an expert to share their expertise. In this online setting, you can't read your students' faces as they listen to your pre-recorded videos. You have to anticipate what they might feel, the questions that they might have, where they're going to get stuck in the implementation. And this is why building a course is so much more than just the bullet points you outline on sticky notes. It's about the experience. Today, I want to share with you 5 key factors to consider during your course creation process. And as we talk through these key factors, I'm going to keep it really high level because this is just one podcast episode. I don't want you to get lost in the weeds. I want you to be able to take away a few concepts, start implementing them, and if you're ready, when you're ready, we can certainly work on this one-on-one together in more depth. So today is going to be a high-level overview of some key factors to take into account. And I want you to keep in mind when we go through these, even though if I say number 1, number 2, number 3, these things are not necessarily done in a specific order. Instead, you'll find yourself thinking about these things simultaneously, sometimes separately, sometimes in a big old kind of mashup. It will likely depend on where you are in the process and just the day of the week as to how you tackle these different factors. The key is that you need to develop a systematic approach to your course creation process so that you're understanding where information and support is needed by your students, you're understanding what needs to be taught, you're really digging into who the recipient of your course will be, and as you explore the needs of your students, you'll be able to determine what the outcomes are, what's needed to get there, and what it will take to get your students on board. So as you can imagine, even your marketing and your messaging is going to come out of having a really clear understanding of these 5 concepts, these 5 ideas that I'm about to share with you right now. So let's talk about these 5 ideas I keep alluding to and telling you is coming. Well, here it is. These are the elements that will help boost your student success, your student engagement, your student completion. First up, remember, this is not necessarily in chronological order. This happens a lot of times in a combination of things at once. First thing to think about is the knowledge type that you are sharing. There are different types of learning, different types of knowledge that you might be trying to convey in your course. You might be focused on what's called declarative knowledge. These are the skills, the facts, the rules. Listening to this podcast right now, you're learning declarative knowledge. You are learning the facts about how to create a strong course, okay? Some learning and courses will be more skill-based or procedural. They are going to be geared toward the development of either motor or technical skills, typically. These are things like computer skills. And finally, there are going to be affective outcomes. That's a learning type. These are training objectives or course objectives that will shift attitudes or beliefs that predispose someone to work in a certain way. For example, this one's a little bit more wishy-washy to understand. I get that, which is why I want to give you an example here. If you are helping a corporate employee think about options for earning income outside of the corporate world, but they've been in corporate for 20, 30, 40 years, you are going to start shifting their attitudes and their beliefs about how to earn income. You might have a course about attitudes toward inclusion and diversity. This is very meta, right? Thinking about thinking. So very much metacognition related. There are other types of knowledge that we might be imparting in our students through our courses, but these are 3 big ones that a lot of our courses will fall into. And these kinds of learnings can be combined, they can be standalone, but regardless, it's just one piece of the puzzle to creating a really solid course that has the potential for your students to be successful. There also needs to be a demonstration of the learning for the training to be considered a success. We want our clients, our students, to put into action what they're learning. And one of the ways to help them be able to do that is to create course objectives. So number 2 in our list is course objectives. And this is exactly what it sounds like. What will the student be able to know, think, or do at the end of the training? But I want you to take this a step further and consider under what conditions they will need to apply the learning from the course. What are the different criteria for success? So if you are helping someone to create a coaching program for their business, what are some of the outcomes of that coaching program? What do you want those coaching program clients to be able to know, think, or do at the end of that training? What does it look like to implement that in their life, in their situation, so that it is deemed a success? Because a lot of times what happens when our students come to us and they say, great, I'm so glad you have this course, but I'm curious to know how many students are actually successful? If you don't know what the objectives for the course are, it's really hard to determine the success of your students. So coming up with those key course objectives, those learning objectives that your students will be able to demonstrate at the end of your course is critical. All right, number 3. This is something that is really important. So I want you to listen up. Delivery order. No, I don't mean getting your order delivered from Panera Bread. What I mean here is that the order you deliver your content in your course must be intentional. You cannot skip around. You have to make sure that the information is being presented in a very logical order. And when I say it means a logical order, you have to take into account that you are probably an expert at what you're teaching. And so you have to think about all of the in-between teeny tiny steps that you no longer think about that have to be presented. Okay? For example, if you were teaching someone to use a computer, you might think, okay, great, let's open up a word processing document, whether that's Google Docs, a Microsoft Word document, and let's start talking about how to create a Word doc. That's because you know how to use the computer. If you are teaching someone to use a computer, you need to start with how to turn it on and how to get past that login screen. So you can see how it's really easy when you're the expert in something to skip really important steps. Let me give you another example. If you are teaching someone how to create a course, you wouldn't start with saying, okay, you need to upload all of your course videos into your digital course system. If that was the first step of how to create a course, you would probably stop right there because it doesn't make sense. You have to place the skills in the appropriate order that is best for the learner in order to successfully facilitate learning and ultimately performance and the implementation of that course material. Yes, this is true even if you are teaching a hobby in your course. I always get served on Facebook and Instagram the ads for Woobles, which is a crochet kit. I've never bought one. They look really intriguing. I like to crochet, so this is always super fun for me to see them. I love watching the little animals being made. But if Woobles, as their company, said, all right, you start, go ahead and put the yarn on the crochet hook and make your first stitch. That would be so confusing because how did we get the yarn onto the crochet hook? Do we just lay it over? Do we have to knot it? What do we do in order to be able to make a first stitch? What is a stitch? How does that happen? So you can see how even if someone's really experienced with something, it's easy to forget the steps that need to be taken. So always, one of my favorite things to do here to really think about delivery order is to have someone who's a novice or at the same level of your potential student go through your course to make sure that there aren't holes. Okay. All right. This brings me to delivery method. And this is probably the most complicated part of the course development process because there are so many considerations, especially today. We have a lot of options available to us. It used to be that when you decided you were going to deliver a course, you went and stood in front of some human beings who were in person. You maybe had slides, maybe you had some overheads. You shared your information. They asked some questions at the end and everyone said goodbye and they walked out of the room. Course delivery now is better. Now we get to think about not only how we present the information to our students, we get to think about the purpose of the course, the resources available, our students' needs, and there are so many different methods available for course presentation. Some course creators are still going to offer their course in person, using that traditional lecture style with maybe some Q&A at the end. Other people are going to incorporate discussion or role playing. And then we kind of move into the online space and it's a free-for-all. You've got video lessons, interactive practices, downloadable, write-inable workbooks, games. We've got pre-recorded videos, live videos. We've got live Q&As. We have all kinds of things available to us. The key is to use the methods that work best for your potential students. We want them engaged. We want them to actively participate. We want them to have access to you. And we want to share information in a variety of delivery methods. As I've talked about in the past, and we talked about with accessibility just a few episodes ago, When I share the podcast, I share a video, an audio, and a full transcript because I want to make sure that as someone's learning, they can choose the delivery method that's best for them. Some of my favorite courses that I've ever been through have provided not just a video lesson, but they've said, you know what? Here's the transcript. Go ahead and download it. Or they've said, you don't have time to sit down at your computer and watch a video? No problem. I'll send this to a private podcast and you can listen to the exact same video lessons at your convenience using your phone and some earbuds. The key is to create that engagement because if our students don't actually use the materials, if they're not going through the course, then guess what happens? No success. They do not learn what you have set out for them to learn. They do not shift their thinking, their believing, their attitudes, their skill levels. None of that changes. And that's certainly not what we want. And this brings me to the fifth component that I wanted to share with you today, and that is to develop feedback. Now, your brain might automatically go to the end of course feedback survey where you say, oh, I'm so glad we spent this time together. I'd love to know your thoughts on how the course went, what you liked, what you didn't like. If I were to consider adding this component, would that have made a difference for you? Right? That's not what I'm talking about. You have to do that. Please don't get me wrong. You do need to do that. But I want you to think about feedback a little bit differently. I want you to flip the script here. With your course content in place, you also need to consistently and constantly provide feedback so that your students can make adjustments, so that they get to stay motivated, so that they can improve their understanding, their performance, their use of the content from your course. And honestly, let's face it, being able to receive some feedback makes learning more interesting. It keeps you dialed in to the process. It pulls people back who might be kind of shifting off to the sides over time and kind of putting it off to the side. The opportunity to get feedback is going to bring them back in. And so just like we want to get feedback from our students so that we can adjust what we're doing, create additional resources or lessons where necessary, we also want to provide feedback to our students. It's going to show our commitment to their outcomes, to their success, to the change that they said, yeah, that's what I want for my life, and I want to sign up for your course. All right. Let's go on to number 6. I think I told you that I had 5 factors, but I really have 6 that I want to talk about. So here's your bonus. I told you 5. Here's the 6th one. And this is to explore the student characteristics. I want you to think about 2 in particular. I want you to think about motivation and readiness. Motivation is a really important thing to take into account when you're thinking about your students because it is going to impact their interest level in completing the course on a reasonable timeline. It's going to impact how they learn from the lessons. It's going to impact how they transfer that information to their business or to their life, depending on what your course is geared toward. And so we want to do everything possible to boost our students' motivation. And one of the best ways to do that is to, you guessed it, offer feedback, like we just talked about. But we also can boost motivation by showing very clearly how the course will pay off for them and for their life or their business. Don't make them guess about why these outcomes will make a difference for them. The other thing that you want to take into account when you think about the characteristics of your students is how ready they are for your course material. Students who aren't ready for your course material are not going to be successful in implementing what you're sharing. And so you might be thinking, great, then my course isn't for them yet. But we don't want to leave them behind. And so one of my favorite ways to help clients or students become ready for a course is to share another resource with them that will help to bridge the gap from where they are to where they need to be so that they can be successful in your course. This might look like a low-cost workshop. It might be a lead magnet that's either free or paid. It could be an extra module or bonus that recognizes your students aren't quite ready for module 1. So you're going to give them that pre-work, that pre-learning to get them ready for module 1. That was a lot. I told you it was high level. I tried to keep it high level, not super detailed, but I hope that it's getting your brain thinking about not just the bullet points you want to share, but all of the other things that you have to take into account when you are constructing your course. It goes beyond the sales page. It goes beyond the name of your course. It is the nitty-gritty details, like the objectives, the delivery order, the delivery method, the feedback that you're providing, the characteristics of your students, and the type of knowledge that you want to impart through your course. This week, as you think about your course, I want you to examine what you already have in place of these 6 things. I know I told you 5, we went with 6 of these 6 factors. And if you discover that you have not yet taken into account any of these things, choose one. Start with knowledge type. What kind of knowledge are you really trying to impart through your course? Start there. Keep it simple. If you've done some of this and you're thinking, oh, I just had that aha moment. There was a light bulb. I realized I need to shift this to make that better. I want you to do that. If you're realizing that maybe you skipped a few steps in your delivery order, or maybe something's out of place, you've gotten the same feedback from students over and over saying, I'm just getting lost. I don't know what to do next. Great. That means something's either missing or it's out of place. Make that adjustment. So choose something out of this list of 6 to work on this week. Whether you're in the planning stages of your course, the revision stage of your course, which is never ending. We consistently revise our courses to be better and better. Or if you are just in this planning stage, go ahead and put this into your brain as something that you need to take into account. All right, let's wrap up for this week. I promised you 5 key factors to consider in creating your course content. I gave you 6, so apparently I can't count. So here they are once more. Knowledge type, course objectives, delivery order, delivery method, develop that feedback, and think about your student characteristics. A lot of times when you sit down to create your course, the focus goes back to the key bullet points you want to share. You're thinking about creating your slides and what information you're putting on your slides. I want you to be really intentional. The information that you share needs to serve an objective. So I'll give you an example. In our college classrooms, we always have our core objectives for a certain course that we teach. For instance, when I teach general psychology, I have a set of learning objectives for the course as a whole. And then I have learning objectives for each chapter or unit that we cover, and those tie directly back to our course objectives. Each of the objectives in the chapter or module then has content to help that objective become a reality. This is the kind of planning I want you to do. I don't want you to just say, I want to teach this, this, and this, and these are the 3 pieces of information I'm going to share about them. Here it is, packaged up nice and neat. I want you to really think about how every step of the way you are creating a web of knowledge for your students so that they can actually implement what it is they're learning, thinking, doing, shifting, beliefs, whatever it is that you are teaching inside your course. That's what I want for you. I hope this was helpful. If you have questions, and I know this in particular can really create a lot of questions, feel free to DM me on Facebook or Instagram at Entrepreneurs in Flow. I'm always here to answer your questions, and I'll see you back here next week for another episode of the Entrepreneur Mindset Podcast, where we focus on mentoring, community, and implementation. It's all about taking action so that we can remove the overwhelm of building a successful and profitable business and add in a little dose of momentum. Until next time, have a healthy, safe, and happy week.